Hallo und willkommen zu einer neuen Folge des Tech und Community Podcasts. In der heutigen Folge sind Peter, Baddeley und Sandro Ineichen zu Gast. Peter ist Director Microsoft Delivery bei dem Softwarehersteller Provision Point. Sandro ist Senior Consultant beim Schweizer Provision Point Partner IOZ. Beide sind heute zu Gast, um über die Wichtigkeit einer kontrollierten Provisionierung von Microsoft 365 Ressourcen, wie zum Beispiel Teams oder Microsoft 365 Gruppen, zu sprechen. Gerade die Erstellung von Teams führt schnell in ein unkontrolliertes Chaos. Aber wie kann man dies kontrollieren und gleichzeitig trotzdem einen guten Self-Service für Anwender anbieten? Dazu nun mehr im Gespräch mit Peter und Sandro, das hier auf Englisch erfolgt. Viel Spaß! So, hello Peter, hello Sandro. Please introduce yourself to our listeners.
Yeah, I'll start. I'm Peter Baddeley. I was one of the founding team at Provision Point. I'm one of the directors. My role day to day at Provision Point is to help customers and partners with their deployment of the product to try and get the best out of how they provision and manage sites and teams in Office 365.
Well, yeah, thanks for having me here, Thomas. My name is Sandro Ineichen. I'm a project manager and consultant at IOZ. We are located in Sursee. This is a small town in central Switzerland. We build solutions based on Microsoft 365, mainly SharePoint, Teams, the whole Power Platform, and Dynamics CRM.
Oh.
So ich könnte auch Deutsch sprechen, but today I will try it in English. Yeah.
Okay, perfectly well. So, this podcast is primarily in German, but nevertheless, this is, I think, the third podcast episode that I do in English. So, Peter, so what triggered the initial founding of Provision Point?
So do you want the funny story or
Absolutely.
the corporate story? So the funny story is I used to work with someone. And we both ended as a company. We both ended up leaving that company, and I started as an independent consultant. And I met up with him for a beer and some dinner in London, and perhaps a few too many beers. He was telling me about this idea he had for a product, and we decided to, and that was Provision Point, and we decided to turn that into a company, which was back in 2016. So that's the fun story.
Funny.
The real story is actually when the closer I looked at it, at the time it was mainly focused around SharePoint because obviously Teams didn't exist at that point in time. And it was about the fact that we'd actually both implemented sort of provisioning solutions for on-premises customers at various points over several years. And the cloud was just starting to really take off around that sort of period. And we just both saw an opportunity to do something, and also the opportunity around the Azure platform and it giving us a lot of flexibility to be able to deliver a sort of multi-tenanted solution. So it just seemed like a good point to be able to do it, that sort of need for repeatable provisioning around SharePoint, which then later became Teams as well. It just seemed a perfect time to do it.
Interesting. So when you mention regarding multi-tenancy, is this something that would be important and interesting for so-called managed service providers, so that you do have a single provisioning solution where you can deliver provisioning services to multiple clients?
So actually Provision Point doesn't do multi-tenancy provisioning at the moment. I was talking more about the multi-tenancy architecture of Provision Point. But interestingly, that point about MSPs is something which we're seeing increasingly, that MSPs are coming to us and asking us about how they could do multi-tenancy provisioning, or just including provisioning as part and Provision Point as part of their offering. I know that's something which Sandro and IOZ do quite a lot, that sort of Provision Point is just sort of baked into what they actually deliver to their customers.
Exactly. Yeah, that's perfect. So what, for the two of you, what are your experiences regarding customer contact and the feedback from customers when you talk about provisioning and the requirement of provisioning for M365 resources?
I'll go first and then I'll let Sandro answer.
Yep.
I always talk to people about one of two scenarios when they're looking to provision workspaces, teams, groups, sites. One is that self-service element. So you have organizations who say, either say it has to be logged with an IT help desk ticket and 3 days later your team will get created, or the other extreme of everyone can create teams, oh panic, we've got a mess. And so Provision Point sits in the middle there with those sort of, or provisioning solution more generally, whatever platform you use, whether that's native or product like Provision Point, sits in the middle there to help with things like approval, guiding users around selecting things like security and the right templates to use, and sort of and managing that process of them creating a team. So giving IT some comfort, but actually also meaning it's not 3 days before you get a team created, which is a bit of a joke. So that's one scenario. And then the second scenario is creating teams for a specific purpose. So it's very nice to go and create a team, but what happens if you create, tens, hundreds of teams on a regular basis for projects, collaboration, marketing campaigns, whatever the core thing you're doing in your business. And those projects, each team needs to be set up with multiple channels, private, standard, shared channels, even now, specific apps like Planner or OneNote, or even, they use Jira or other third-party apps. How long does it take someone to set that team up in the right way every single time? And how much, what's the problem if they do it wrong? And so again, that sort of templated provisioning is that sort of second use case. Sometimes it's both combined, but those are the sort of two use cases I see the most frequent about provisioning. Sandro?
Yeah, many of our customers, or say at least many of them, have implemented Teams during the start of the pandemic, so early 2020. No one really had time to think about guidelines, stuff like that. So what they got now is kind of a mess, wild grow. And sometimes they are a bit, I don't know how to say, skepticism about third-party tools, I guess. But after them, we show Provision Point. I think most of them are more than happy to use it because it offers them a very great flexibility, and they can see all the benefits from getting Provision Point.
Yeah, this is one of the things that I encounter in my consultancy meetings as well, especially when customers are under the impression that the built-in capabilities of M365 and Azure Active Directory are sufficient to meet all of the, or match all to the purposes that a client has for provisioning and or governance, because it's not only about having a provisioning solution in place, but to provide a proper governance around it, right?
Yeah, agreed. I think just more generally, I think there's a bit of skepticism from organizations about using third-party vendor tools. I think you're probably seeing a new generation of people managing Microsoft 365, whereas often they are in more business functions, modern workplace, digital workplace managers. They've not got 20, 30 years of IT experience, and they're not used to purchasing third-party tools, which are, essential for doing many functions when you're managing a complex environment. So I think there's that element. And I also, I completely agree. It's not just about provisioning. It's about applying all your right governance rules and managing those teams, sites effectively ongoing throughout their life cycle.
So if I run a small business, is a provisioning solution, or the demand for having a proper provisioning solution, a good idea, or is it just viable for large enterprises?
I don't think so, because it's we have some small business customers. Maybe they have 5 employees, and we as larger organizations as well. And because the price is really affordable, and it's also suitable for small companies with smaller budgets. So I think, no, it's also a key point for smaller business. Yeah.
It's also not just about the size, it's about what they're doing. So, a provisioning solution might be not appropriate if you're only ever going to create 3 teams in your organization ever. But if you are like a small consulting firm, a small firm of architects, engineering firm, other things like that, where you do a lot of project-based working and you're creating a lot of teams for projects on a regular basis, then it completely makes sense that you would need a provisioning solution, because you want to be able to do that at speed. Also, you tend to find with smaller firms, they don't have IT resources in-house that might be outsourced. So, actually a provisioning solution makes it much easier for their users to create teams correctly, and they don't rely on an IT service or an IT function which perhaps isn't available to them.
Yeah, this is something that I already mentioned at the very beginning, the managed service provider approach, because especially smaller companies who do not have their own IT staff in place work with an outsourced local IT shop who is responsible for multiple clients. And especially those normally work based on a ticketing system. Coming what you mentioned, that I do request a team and I do have to wait a certain time until I get my team configured.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing which is worth saying around your point around ticketing is you can do provisioning in different ways. So provisioning can also be driven by business processes. So for example, someone logging a ticket could go and trigger a workflow to then go and do a provisioning action in Provision Point or another solution which someone might be using. Equally, it might be because they create a new customer in their dynamic system, or they create a new project in their project management system. Provisioning can be automated as well as user driven, and we see certainly quite a bit of that.
Okay, so you do, so Provision Point does have some kind of an API to trigger certain actions so that it can be integrated with whatever kind of IDM solutions or whatever kind of HR processes, for example, is in place.
Yeah, absolutely. And we probably see about 30% of our use cases of users who don't actually interface with the application. It's just a back-end service which is used to manage the provisioning, but they're doing that request and that action to start the process in their back-end system, and it's just all automated by the API. You can even get quite smart and say, well, actually, we're going to take data from that back-end system. Here's our customer number, here's our project number, and that controls maybe how the team is named, how the team is configured.
Yeah, that's one of the great pluses for us as a partner, because it offers us a great flexibility, not just the API. We also have some webhooks, so we can create or start the provisioning process, but pause it and then send some information to another system like a CRM or stuff like that. So that's one of the great, or of the key points we highly like.
Yeah, awesome. So normally when we talk about provisioning solutions, we talk about how a resource, a team, or an M365 group starts its journey and is being used. So, but the life cycle not only consists of getting a group on its way, but we are talking about the end of life of a provision resource as well. Do you see that all clients are aware about handling the overall life cycle of such resources?
I'll let Sandro answer that one, because he's perhaps talking with clients much more day to day.
Yeah, some are using it really just for provisioning, just for creating teams, but others are really like the focus on the whole life cycle. So we implement the lease functionality and stuff like that, so they can decide, even if a project maybe has ended, what should happen with the team. Should it be archived, or should it even be deleted? And that's something. It depends on the customer, but some of our customers really like the whole life cycle management, which gives us Provision Point.
So, which kind of M365 resources can I provision or manage the life cycle with? Those Provision Points.
So Microsoft Teams, obviously, SharePoint sites of all types. So we've been around since 2016. So we even still support Classic sites. We have a couple of customers still on Classic. They'll probably never migrate. We've got modern sites with or without an Office 365 group. We still have a couple of customers on subsites, although with like the recent announcements from Microsoft around limits of libraries in a site collection, they're rapidly moving away from that model. planner plans in the context of anything which is group connected. So provisioning a planner plan into a team, provisioning a planner plan into an M365 group. And then we also support Yammer communities connected to M365 groups. One of the key challenges with provisioning is if you want to use a tool, a provisioning solution like Provision Point, you need to turn off Teams creation, because otherwise people will start to bypass that process. And the only way Microsoft let you do that is to turn off group creation as a whole. So for larger organizations which use products like Yammer, that creates a problem because they want to control groups and teams, but they want to let people continue to collaborate in Yammer. So that's why we've introduced that Yammer community support. So that's an important thing generally for people to bear in mind if they're going to put a provisioning solution in place, is that you have to turn off creation for all of those different group objects. So you need to make sure that you've got a solution and approach which embraces all of those different types of workloads you use.
Yeah. So this is one of the magic things, I call them, what happens in the background regarding Microsoft 365 groups, because M365 groups can start its overall life in multiple M365 workloads, and it behaves slightly different depending on where the journey starts, as I call it, and which features are enabled.
Yeah, and often people aren't really aware of that. They don't really understand what the M365 group is. And also when we've talked to customers, you also probably want to think about the provisioning and the lifecycle journey of those different workloads very differently. You might be much stricter about how you control a team or a group which is enabled for external collaboration versus, say, something like a Yammer community where you're not really so bothered about it.
Yeah, right. So does Provision Point support assigning sensitivity labeling to the resources?
Yes, it does. Yeah. So we've supported sensitivity labels for about 18 months now, assigning them of resources. One of the key things which we do is not just assign those resources, we obviously associate all the other elements of that. So if you want to control guest access or other settings, privacy with those labels, we also allow you to restrict which labels people can select for different types of teams. So for instance, say I'm creating a team for internal use only, I might only be able to select 2 of the available labels, whereas if I'm creating a team for a different use, and this is where our concept of service definitions, I think templates comes in mind, I might have a different set of sensitivity labels. We see different, we see some customers really adopting really strong on sensitivity labels, and others perhaps a bit less so. I don't know if Sandro has any comments around that area.
No, we don't use it, to be honest, but we use the classification. I think it's called the old group classification, where you can set kind of a tag to a group and then use it by maybe Flow or PowerShell, stuff like that, to have certain ways to use it within the whole ecosystem. But no, we never set up the labels you mentioned.
Yeah, I think it is mixed. Some customers are starting to really embrace it. Others are not quite ready for it yet. We're also seeing a surge in interest in retention labels, actually. Retention labels around files. So that's something which we're bringing to the product this quarter, is actually being able to assign a retention label to those to your document libraries which get created with your teams. So you can then have those documents all set up in the right way, and nice models around how that can be different for different templates as well.
Okay, cool. So with a large part of the audience being located in German-speaking countries, I definitely need to ask regarding GDPR and data privacy, especially regarding reports or other kind of personal data that administrators might see in reports.
Yeah, so I'll start on that one, and then Sandro might be able to fill in a little bit on just like why because I still don't quite get why the product is particularly popular in this market, but it is. So in terms of things like GDPR and privacy, firstly, it's a SaaS service, so it's hosted, but it's hosted in Microsoft Azure. we create data centers, and we've got data centers set up in different parts of the world. So in Europe, and that's Europe, not the UK, sadly anymore. So we have a European data center. We also have a data center in Switzerland because we have quite a strong customer base in Switzerland, and we're exploring adding one into the German data center as well. That one's been a little bit slow to catch up with all the relevant services, but we're planning on adding one into the German data center. So firstly, it will be hosted in an Azure data center local to that customer. Also, secondly, bear in mind that Provision Point isn't managing the data inside of your sites or teams. What it's managing is the process of how those sites and teams are created, and then what happens to those sites and teams when they've not been created, when they reach the end of their life cycle. So the data which we hold is limited, but it is managed within a local data center, and we've obviously got all the appropriate data processing agreements, GDPR compliant processes which support that as well.
Yeah, so GDPR is definitely not my specialty. So I'm glad that there is an instance in Switzerland for Provision Point, and normally often that's enough for our customer, to be honest. So if they know that their data location is Switzerland, they are more than happy, to be honest.
So how can then IOZ help clients to start implementing provisioning and governance processes?
So how we do it typically in a project, you mean?
Yep.
Well, it's kind of a predefined process, to be honest. I call it steps to success. So we start by doing an analysis. So we make an analysis of their actual environment. So how many teams or sites or stuff like that do they have? What type of teams? How is the structure? Stuff like that. So just the analyze part, as always in a project. After that, we start by have some requirement and governance workshops. So we ask them, what do they need really? How many templates? What kind of configuration? For example, as Peter mentioned before, does every template need guest access or stuff like that? Do they need some kind of approval workflows, or who can request a template? After that, we build it. So we build the templates, we configure everything they want and let them testing. So they can test the product, they can request some teams, they can try the lease, how is the behavior if a team is archived, stuff like that. And after that is just the training for the admins, sometimes also for the users. But to be honest, Provision Point, it's very easy to use from a user perspective. So mostly we just add it to the teams as the app, so they can go to the Provision Point app, select the template they want, and request it. That's pretty much the steps to success.
Awesome, great. Sounds like a really valuable solution.
Absolutely. So we offer it on every quote. That's part of the game. So no Teams project without a Provision Point.
I really like that. I might have to take that phrase from you.
Yeah, I know. But that's the truth.
So what are the options for a trial of Provision Point?
Yes, we offer free trials for anyone looking at provision, who wants to consider Provision Point, wants to look at how they will govern and manage the product. So we make free 30-day trials available to people, and they can set that up on their own with a partner like IOZ as well. We would typically guide a client in terms of where their best choice is. So if they're ready to sort of move ahead straight away, they might look to spin that up straight in their live tenant. Often clients prefer to do that in like a Microsoft developer tenant, a test tenant, other things like that. It's a bit mixed. Some people don't have that in place, but where they do, we generally suggest to try and do there initially, not because Provision Point's, particularly invasive or anything like that. It's just, if you're going to be creating 40, 50 or more test teams, you don't necessarily want to create those in your live tenant.
Yeah, right. And quite a few at least larger customers tend to have some kind of a change request of approach of introducing new software solutions, and they do not want to have anything unapproved. So legally unapproved in their productive tenant, right?
Yeah. So it's often about the individual customer, their individual use case, and what's the best approach. But we do offer free trials, and many customers take that option available if they want to. I should also mention, actually, because I don't think we've mentioned it. Obviously, we've mentioned the data center locations, but obviously you're saying that this is a podcast going to the German-speaking market. Is we do localize the app. So the app is available in German as well as a number of other major European languages. So, and that can either be all German for all users, or if you're maybe a large organization spread across multiple countries, that language can be set for different users as well.
Oh, that's quite important. Thank you for adding that, Peter. So before closing up our recording for today, I want to leave it to the two of you to just do a last embracement for provisioning and the importance of provisioning in M365.
I'll give my brief one, and then I'll let Sandro jump in and do a better one than me. I think the two biggest reasons to consider provisioning solutions for me are, one, the time saving that will give to the users. They get their sites and teams in a much quicker fashion, and it also reduces that load on IT and other people necessarily required to support that. So that's one big reason. And the second reason for me is, what will happen if you don't do it? So, we are increasingly talking to organizations now who have created hundreds, thousands of teams. They've created teams where people don't know if the data in there is correct, if it's accurate, it's not being archived correctly, it's been set up with the wrong security attached to it. What's the risk of not doing it? What's the risk associated with a team being accidentally created, which is externally facing, which has sensitive personal or commercial data in it? And that's crucial for me, is why you want to do it right from the start. Provision Point does help and can be implemented later. We can help tidy up, but it's better to do it from the start.
Yeah, one of the other benefits is it's also about time saving, but not after the implementation. It's before the implementation, because Provision Point can also help to launch teams and other services much quicker, because it provides us as a partner a kind of a framework. So again, we can go through all the necessary steps, as I mentioned before, all the government requirements, and it's very, very easy for the customer to understand what are the capabilities, what will work and what don't. So that's one of the other benefits we like about Provision Point.
Okay, so thank you both so much for being guests on my podcast. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us, yeah.
Die Links zu Provision Point und auch zu IOZ findet ihr natürlich wie immer im zugehörigen Blogartikel zu dieser Podcast-Episode. Ich kann Provision Point aus eigener Erfahrung und Einsätzen in Kundenprojekten uneingeschränkt empfehlen. Probiert es doch einfach mal aus. Die Links zur Provision Point Webseite und auch zum Provision Point Partner IOZ findet ihr wie immer im Blogartikel zu dieser Episode. Bis zum nächsten Mal.